Hello, my name is Nelson Stover, and this presentation is entitled Living Like the Earth is Sacred. It's an overview of the implications of the work of Thomas Berry and how his writings help us understand a new way to relate to the earth as a species, as a human species. I'm one of the people who had the unique opportunity of meeting with Thomas after he retired and moved back to Greensboro in 1995. During the last 15 years of his life, there were several of us who could meet and talk with Thomas while he was here in Greensboro, both on formal and on informal occasions, like my birthday party. Thomas was an ecologian. Thomas understood that at the beginning of the 21st century, the human species was at a time that it was re-understanding its relationship to the planet Earth. Thomas understood that dawn and sunsets and other times are mystical moments when the numinous dimension reveals itself with a special intimacy. And he was looking for ways to articulate this intimacy, to foster this intimacy, and then to translate this closeness, this depth understanding into practical action.
So Thomas, the way Thomas put it, is to appreciate the numinous aspect of the universe, we need to understand that we are not separate from the universe. It's not like there's us and something else. There is only one thing, us in the universe. We are an integral part of the universe, now, in the future, and in the past. In the last of the books that Thomas wrote by himself, a book called The Great Work, which we've done a study guide and it's available online. And if you send me an email, I'll be glad to send you a link to how to get to the study guide for The Great Work. And I'd be glad to figure out how to do it online. Thomas wrote, the historical mission of our times is to reinvent the human at the species level. And this picture I took on the train platform in Mumbai. But and I have to ask myself, when you talk about reinventing the human at the species level, you have to include all these folk and all the other folk. And then he went on to say, with critical reflection within the community of life systems, this picture's from Chicole Village, in a time developmental context, and this I must say is one of my favorite pictures of Thomas. We had an art exhibit of some tapestries that told the story of the universe, and Thomas came to view the tapestries. I love this picture. So, reinvent the human at the species level with critical reflection in a time developmental context through story and shared dream experience. That is to say, we have to create stories that hold our experience and relate us to the natural world. That's what it means to reinvent the human. It doesn't mean grow a sixth finger or you know, some other, an ear under your nose or something. It means change the story you tell about life itself. Then finally, as in way of introduction, Thomas focused on 4 basic establishments that just a minute. I want to go backwards. Thomas focused on 4 basic establishments that determine human life. And government, religious tradition, the university, and business. And I'll deal with each of those in the third part. But as he saw it, and as I said earlier, they all presume a discontinuity between the human and the non-human mode of being. And this is the fundamental source of the problem in the 21st century, in my opinion. And figuring out how to resolve that is key to solving all the other problems. And it's the only thing worth worrying about. And if you want to take notes, or I'll send these slides to anybody, all the footnotes at the bottom are what page, what book. So, if we want to reinvent the human at the species level, it seems to me that the way you change the way humans work is you change the way they think about the world they live in, or a world view, a new world view, a contemporary world view. And for some years, I've been asking myself, what would that mean in simple language, not a book? And I've come to 4 things. We live in an emerging universe, not a fixed reality. We live amidst a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. We can experience ourselves directly at one with the universe. You don't have to have somebody else tell you what to do. And all beings participate actively or passively, consciously or unconsciously, in shaping tomorrow. So these 4 things, I want to explore these in a little bit of depth, and then I want to look at how they might make some suggestions, not complete final answer, about how they might play out in the 4 institutions, and then I want to make some suggestions about practically some skills that we need to function. That isn't the right word, but I don't have a better one. So, the story of the universe has been told in many ways by peoples of the earth at various times. This is the Ellora Caves. This was carved out of solid rock by hand in the 6th century. I've often said to my engineering friends, could you build me one of these? I'd like a copy, please. Not possible. So, in our time, it behooves us to figure out how to tell the story of the universe. And this is a rock cut on US 19 in West Virginia. This is my way of telling myself that we live in a reality that has been emerging over time. And there have been changes, and it's a long process. And figuring out how to tell the story of evolution in a way that's believable and passion-filled is a tricky element in the 21st century. So the second point, the universe is a communion of subjects rather than a collection of objects. This is my dog. My dog is my perpetual reminder that the world is filled with selves. If if you think that only two-legged humans are filled with selfhood, then meet my dog, who's sleeping next to me right now. Or meet this toucan. If you ever are looking for a good vacation, go to Costa Rica. It's a wonderful place. And in Costa Rica, there's a game preserve, and you can go inside this cage, it's a walk-in house for toucans. And these guys will come. This guy was sitting on my arm, and he looks at me like, hey. And I mean, looking into the eye of a toucan is it's an experience. A toucan is a self. I'm quite convinced. So the third element has to do with experiences of the numinous, or seeing through when the natural world arouses awe, astonishment, surprise, and admiration. A marvel, a feeling of glory. What are those times when, maybe it's a spring day, when you look up and the sun is just magical. It's magical. Or on a winter day, when the sun and the snow on the trees. I know some of you further in the north, you kind of wish there wasn't so much snow, but down here, we only get snow a little bit. And when it does, it's really magical. And this is one of those kind of mornings. So what are those kind of times for you when you and the world and wonder are the same? That's what I'm trying to point out. That's my third point. And the fourth point is that everything participates in creating the future. So this is big words, and I leave them in here because I think we need to learn to be comfortable with big words. So this is cosmogenesis. The creation of the universe is structured by autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is the power that each thing has to participate directly in the cosmos creating endeavor. This is a volcano in Costa Rica. This is a mountain participating in shaping the future. It's impressive. It's impressive. Or this is a women's meeting in India. This is village women participating in shaping the future. Everybody has the direct opportunity to self-consciously participate in shaping the future. Now, so those are four kind of touchstones for me of a new way, or a fresh way, or at least a way of looking at life in the 21st century. We live in an emerging universe amidst a communion of subjects where you can know yourself at one with the universe, and we all participate in shaping the future actively or not. So then we have to ask, how does that play out in institutions? Because, and I'll come to this later again, but this is the problem we have today is not we need better people. We need structures that allow us to function in the 21st century. And one of those structures is the university. Either we have the universities can continue to teach people how to hammer nails and argue about past philosophical debates, and consume more stuff, or they can educate people how to plant gardens and flow with the rivers and function in the natural world. This, by the way, is my garden at my house. And this is a rock. When I talk to people who live in Greensboro, this is actually taken at Pilot Mountain. And I was up on Pilot Mountain one time, and there was a college student up there. And he and I were looking both at this same rock. And I said, hey, what do you study in school? Well, he said, I'm taking a geology course. I said, oh, really? That's interesting, a geology course. I said, what do you know about this rock? He said, well, it looks like the wind blew on it. I said, that's a good thing. I said, how old do you think it is? Well, he said, it's probably several thousand years old, I'd say. Well, yeah, several thousand. This Pilot Mountain is 500 million years old. 500 million years old. It predates the Appalachian Mountains 2 to 1. And most people who live in Greensboro have seen Pilot Mountain. You can see Pilot Mountain but walk outside. But most people that live here don't have any idea how old it is. What are the universities teaching their kids? They're teaching them this is a pink rock. No, this is 500 million years old. This rock was here before the Appalachian Mountains. That's a long time ago. Plain and simple. I could go on and on. So now, the religious institutions. I've traveled a fair bit. That's a true statement. This is a temple in India. And both Eastern religion and Western religion have gifts to give to the 21st century, but also severe problems. The Eastern religions have developed tremendous stories and images about the interior world, but they're stuck in those images and don't know how to connect them to the natural world and to real life in the 21st century. And in the West, we built these great fortresses, and then we think that religion can go on inside the fort. And paint the windows so you can't see the trees. Both the East and the West have relatively successfully cut themselves off from the natural world in the 21st century. What we need is an ecological spirituality that integrates the natural world and the spiritual world with the same language and the same story and the same experiences, so that we have one reality that we're living in. And then I think we have a chance. If this is a commercial, I'm unabashed. But if you haven't read my book, in my book called Through Three Portals, I try to work through the task of getting science and religion using the same language in the 21st century. These two butterflies are actually the same butterfly. The one on the right has its wings open, and the one on the left has his wings shut, and that's his defense mechanism. He's supposed to look like a spooky owl, and then predators stay away but when he wants his friends to see how beautiful he is, he opens his wings. I would like to just note there are now 12 people on this call, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Now, the third institution that has Thomas addresses and that requires major attention in the 21st century is whoops, I got carried away here, the business community and businesses. And primarily the 20th century really was driven by petroleum. The first oil well, Trivial Pursuit, when was the first oil well drilled? Where? 1891 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. And oil cannot be, there's no more oil being produced. There's no new oil. We're just taking old oil out of the ground. And we just can't pump it any faster. A little bit here and there. We can frack a bit. But there's no more oil. And the 20th century was basically the last century that will get through the whole time with cheap oil. So what are the options? Things like little wind turbines or solar power. This I took in India some years ago, actually. And then, so the educational institutions have to find ways to teach people about how we relate to the natural world. The religious institutions have to find a way to recover spiritual connection to the natural world. The business community has to find a way to live in harmony with the natural world and not just gobble up resources. And the political world has to find ways to understand that the task of the human beings is not to control the planet. The task is to become integral with the larger Earth community. I took this picture of a crab on Topsail Island. It's the beach, the North Carolina beaches. And we go there every year. And I have to remember that when I go to Topsail, I am going to visit the home of the crab. It's not like it's my island. It's the crab's island, and he's glad to let me come. But I'm a guest in the house of the crab. And practically, we need to find ways to involve the educated and the uneducated and the upper class and all the classes and races in one decision-making process. Use technology participation. So now, so that's the four institutions. So I've done an introduction to Thomas. I've done 4 principles of the Echozoic era. I've looked briefly at the changes that need to happen in the 4 institutions. It's not a comprehensive analysis by any means. And now I want to look at 4 kind of operational paradigms, or kind of 4 fresh ways to go about thinking that will allow us to move forward in the 21st century. One is that analogy is key. We must understand that when we're talking about the divine, religious questions, spiritual depth, and the natural world, we are using metaphor, analogy, simile, whatever other words like that you want to use. And this statue here I took is in India, and one of the great gifts of Indian religious life is that they have these great sets. I mean, wouldn't you be scared of this guy? I mean, this guy's terrible, right? He got a big snake. He's huge. And a big knife. What's that in his hand? Man, But they understand that this is not like CNN reporting. This is a dynamic that you need to know exists in the world. Mean wildness. But that mean wildness that guy is a metaphor for mean wildness. Don't go looking for a guy carrying around a snake like that. I'm trying to push a button here. The divine is real, but it will never be real in the same way that Wolf Blitzer is real reporting on CNN, or somebody embedded with Third Army going into Iraq. It's a different kind of real. And the wisdom traditions have known this. This is a picture of, I have this. This is a picture, it hangs in my living room. And this is Wandjina, the Aboriginal spirit god. And what you see, if you look, you notice Wandjina has no mouth. Wandjina has eyes and a nose and arms and toes, but no mouth. That's because Wandjina speaks directly to the human heart. Wandjina is the divine speaking directly to the human heart. It's a different kind of speech. It's not 1, 2, 3. It's something different than that. So one day Thomas taught me a new word that I didn't know. I was sitting in his room, and he said, "Now, you need to know about metaphorical language, because that's the wisdom, that's the language for talking about the divine in the natural world. And the opposite of the divine, of metaphorical language, is univocal language." I actually never knew the word univocal, but univocal means one voice, one meaning. So you can say this slide has black letters on a green background, or light green or something. But to talk about the spider on the right, you miss everything if you try to say this is dewdrops on some monofilament. No, I mean, this is spider breakfast on a dewy morning. And it's different. You miss everything if you try to reduce the spider down to the color. I don't know how else to say that, but it's important. If I haven't said it, then I apologize. My second point of what we need to do differently in the 21st century is that in my opinion, and I want to give myself a minute here on this one. Many people think that the task of the individual, of the human individual, is to become better, smarter, more spiritual. Some people think richer and famous and have a lot of stuff, but most of us are kind of beyond that. But even when you get beyond that, wait a minute. But I want to say that it's not about being a better person. It's important. That's important. But that's not the key. The key to the 21st century, in my opinion, is how can we build groups of people to collectively work together to accomplish a task, a common task. It's not consciousness, it's corporateness. So this is a quote from The Universe Story on page 110. If you haven't read The Universe Story, read it. If you want the excerpted version, ask me. I got the excerpted version. I got an excerpted version of the great work too. But in the universe story, there's a great passage about Argos, a new creature that was the first multicellular animal. And the passage is really great. It's like for 3 million years, 2 million years, 2 billion years, I mean. For 2 billion years, they've been single-celled creatures. And they knew kind of how to get along with each other. Some of them ate each other, and some of them helped each other out. But one day, there was a multicellular creature that got the message came from the creature itself, not from, it wasn't like cell number 1 passed a message to cell number 2. It's like in between cell number 1 and cell number 2, an idea emerged. So you think about yourself. I mean, where does an idea come from? Do you have a cell up there on the top that's the kind of the kingpin cell? No. You yourself create ideas. We don't have good language here, but it's an amazing thing. And what does it take? So your body is a collection of cells who have a structure that allows them to function together to do something. What would it mean for a group of people to be the equivalent, complex equivalent? That we don't have good poetry here. I'm trying. But for me, that's the point of the 21st century, is to figure out how to do that. And one stepping stone for me has been Skype conversations. I've been working now for the last 4 years. This is some students in Chickalee Village. My laptop is over on the right, and we have been having Skype conversations between these kids and schools in the United States. And this, for me, is the beginning of understanding what it means for two really different kinds of groups of people to function together. And these conversations, ask me more about that later sometime. Steve Harrington is trying to get me to write more. So, first was we have to learn how to use analogy. Second, we have to change our opinion from getting smarter and better to corporateness working together. Third, we have to change our fundamental lifestyle pattern from stuff to significance. Full disclosure, my grandfather was the vice president of Marathon Oil. My father worked for Marathon for his entire life. Marathon sent me to school, paid all my bills. So I owe a lot to Marathon. But fueling the American spirit, come on, give me a break. I'm sorry. This cannot be the message to carry us into the 21st century. Just making stuff. This is a glass vial making machine in Punwell. But just making stuff is not going to get us through the 21st century. Thomas wrote, I would suggest we see these early years was when we rediscover the Earth community. Maybe rather than making stuff, we should go out and plant a tree together. By the way, my wife is the second from the right. She is a tree planter. All you got to do is say, Elaine, you want to plant trees? And buddy, she'll drop everything and go plant trees. She's planted a lot of trees in Greensboro. So, finally, I'm convinced that we have a worldview problem. in the 21st century. And unless we find ways to address the fact that we live in a world that is different, categorically different from before, we have no chance of surviving creatively in the 21st century. So the lady on the right lives in the forest. The guy at the bottom is a farmer. And those are two different ways of looking at things. And the picture on the right is the catalytic cracking tower at the Marathon Refinery in Robinson, Illinois. That's the engine that drives the 21st century factory. And so, but what's the new, what's the word we're going to use? And I'm going to use formation, because that's what I'm trying to talk about, that Argos, little piece I did on Argos. We need a new way of talking about the fact that humans and the natural world functioning as a system together in the 21st century. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And let me see what happens here. There you go. Thank you. Journey courageously into the future. So that's what I got to say. I'll say that to anybody, anytime, any place. So let's talk about this. I'm going to unmute everybody, and if you think you're causing background noise, then mute yourself. And then let's see if I can do this. Hold on, I'm trying to unmute people. Maybe I can. So you can say what word or picture caught your attention. Anybody have a comment? I'm going to try to end this in the next 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm always open. Like I said, I could talk about this forever.
I'd like to say something. My name is Carol Kilby, and my husband Paul and I are watching this in Mexico, but we do live in Halliburton Highlands, and we run the Gaia Farmhouse, and we have devoted our work there, our retreat center, to Thomas's work. And the picture that caught my attention was the one on Argus.
Oh, yeah.
And the challenge of finding language to describe that evolutionary impulse with which we're called to cooperate and co-create.
Yep.
I suspect.
Go ahead.
I suspect we're going to have to create that language.
No, Nick. We're just going to. No, we're just going to ask you, and you're going to tell us. Isn't that how it works?
Two cells talking to each other.
Yeah. Go ahead. Anybody else? Well, just for the record, so there are now 12 people on this line. I'm the 13th person.
This is Jan McGuire in Lindsay, California. I'm reading a book called The Intelligence of Plants. And I do think that we have a language. If we just learn to use it, we become desensitized. But he says we have, 6 senses. There's the usual sensory organs that we always think of. But there's also the feelings, the gut feelings we have. And when we will sit down next to a tree and commune with it, we can feel what the tree is trying to tell us or what the birds in our yards are trying to tell us. We can begin to communicate with nature through our feelings.
Yes, I agree to that. I agree. Actually, I'm yeah, that's true. Somebody else.
Hi, my name is Will Batchelor. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm sitting here in Greensboro, North Carolina at my computer. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, and about the whole thing about listening, about communicating with the outside world and communicating with our trees and using our feelings, I think to even go a step before that, I think for a lot of people, a lot of these ideas, I mean, I guess a lot of people on this call these ideas of connecting with the earth is not new, but as Nelson pointed out, that for a lot of people in this world, it's a very new thing of connecting with other people around the world or connecting with nature. And I think even before we can connect through our feelings, I think even a step before that is we need to connect with our senses by what we see, by what we hear, by what we smell. And by doing that, it's important to stay still and remain silent. I think that's what I like about Buddhism and mindfulness, is being mindful of the world around you. And slowly but surely, just by focusing and thinking about what's around us, we begin to start to connect with it automatically. And that's kind of my 2 cents.
Somebody else?
My name is Paul Irwin, and the image that caught my attention was, and I can't remember its name, was the picture of the divine you have in your home, which is a mountain.
Wandjina.
Wachua.
Wandjina, yeah.
Wachua. I love that because it calls us to connect our heart rather than with our minds to the divine, to the universe.
Yeah.
This is Judy Myatt in Nova Scotia. I was really struck with your analogy of the cells in our body working together to complete function. I think this is an excellent way of saying what we can learn from our own bodies.
Yeah, and for me, the trick is how to extrapolate that lesson into the larger realm of my daily life in organizations.
Right.
And it's even hard for me just to include my dog, my wife just came home, so he's up now. Anyway, to include the natural world and other people in this conversation. So, anyway, it's good. If any of you, I'm kind of, we got about 5 minutes to make it till 9 o'clock on my clock. If any of you have, a couple of people suggested other books, those are helpful things. I'll be glad to work to kind of circulate things there or other thoughts. Or if you're interested in pursuing this conversation further, I would certainly look forward to finding ways to work with each of you. I'm really, this is an amazing group of people that's on this call, actually. And I deeply appreciate you all being here. And if we can find ways to, if you want to find ways to continue this conversation, I'll be willing to explore ways to continue this conversation, any clues that people have.
Nelson, I would like to say I appreciate your hesitant presentation. My name is Desmond Howard from Central Ontario. I have enjoyed listening to you. A couple of things, your pictures brought to mind what I saw on my television screen earlier on today was an experiment of ants out in space, and without gravity they were able to find their footing and learn to work together.
That would be cool.
I hope that that's going to be the outcome of your presentation here tonight.
Good one, Desmond.
This is Fred. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm Fred Lehman. I'm in Burlington, North Carolina, and one thing that came to mind was during this presentation was the difficulty of using words. I mean, it seems like we have evolved to the point where we excessively depend upon words, and it gets even more intense with the technologies of computer communication and so forth. And somehow it seems to me while I'm looking at the pictures and that there is so much to be learned in other ways possibly. And so I'm just wondering myself I know that, you know, the other senses, our senses are important, and also probably things like music and poetry, which is words but expressed differently. But maybe there are other ways for us to reconnect. We certainly came evolutionarily, we have come through a long journey before words. And
I have to tell a story on Fred. Fred went with me to India a couple of weeks ago, earlier this year, and we went to those caves. That I showed the picture of the rock cave. So Fred just sat for a while in a monk's cell carved out of rock about 1,000 years ago. And that was quite an experience, eh, Fred?
yeah, I mean, I think part of my experience there was being overwhelmed by my senses, and maybe that's the way that the ancients dealt with this, is to just, and my great feeling of need at that point was to just sit still and not try to take in all of the immensity of what was just relatively a small place compared to the world, but yet overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we do have many ways to experience. And our use of words, I guess that has to do with communication. And but how can we communicate in ways that don't use words, and particularly with our environment and with our world and our universe?
I tried to distinguish between two machines communicating together while two humans were communifying together. I'm not sure how we can tease out that distinction, but there certainly is the need to distinguish between the transaction, the stimulus response of a machine to the exchange of spirit and thought of humans.
Yeah, it's very hard, and
I like
Go ahead.
It's Paul Irwin in Mexico, Halliburton, Ontario. I love Desmond's idea of the ants. Carol and I saw hundreds and hundreds of tiny brown ants taking a dismembered wasp up the wall of our cottage, and they knew that they needed that wasp up somewhere in the roof of this home we're staying in. But it was amazing to see the communication and the intensity with which those little bees accomplished the task. Mindless, wonderful. Not a word was said among them to our ear anyway.
Our ear.
Go ahead. Who else? All right. Well, this conversation could go on, and I appreciate everybody being here. I said we'd start on my clock at 8 o'clock and end at 9 o'clock. I would like to encourage people. I'll see that you continue to get the newsletter from Emerging Ecology. We do want to continue this conversation, find ways to continue it. I deeply appreciate all of you being in on this call tonight, and like I said, I look forward to keeping this conversation going, and hope we can find, and we'll work with you to find ways to keep this conversation going, because this is for me, this is the key questions that face the 21st century, and